Rain fell in delicate silver threads over the small coastal town of Harbor's Rest, a place where secrets seemed to hide in the salty air and whisper between the crashing waves. On a narrow street that smelled faintly of cinnamon from the bakery 2 doors down, stood a weathered house with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch. Inside that house lived 3 sisters, Clara, May, and Lila, each bound by blood, but divided by truths they didn't yet dare to speak. Clara, the eldest at 32, carried herself with a quiet strength. She worked as a nurse at the town clinic, her hands always warm, her voice calm, her life dedicated to caring for others. May, 2 years younger, was the restless spirit, a struggling painter whose work never sold, but who never stopped believing her art might change someone's heart. Lila, the youngest at 25, was the dreamer, a librarian who read stories late into the night, but kept her own tucked tightly away. For as long as they could remember, it had always been the 3 of them, especially since their mother's passing a decade ago. Their father had disappeared long before that, vanishing without a word. Clara had stepped into the role of protector, May became the fighter, and Lila, the one who needed protecting most, found safety in their presence. But in Harbor's Rest, peace was never permanent. It began with an envelope slipped through their mail slot one rainy Tuesday evening. Clara found it first, the paper damp at the edges. Inside was a single sheet with 8 words typed neatly in black ink. The truth will come whether you want it or not. No signature. No explanation. She didn't tell May or Lila right away. Clara had always believed in shielding her sisters from unnecessary worry. But 2 days later, a second envelope appeared, this one addressed directly to Lila. It contained an old photograph, the 3 sisters as children, standing on the porch with a man they didn't recognize. Behind them, the faint outline of the ocean could be seen through fog. On the back of the photograph, in the same typed font, was a single question. Do you know who he really is? Lila stared at the image for hours that night, her mind digging through memories that didn't exist. She didn't show the picture to May, but May wasn't one to miss changes in her sister's moods. By the end of the week, all 3 were hiding something from each other. One Saturday morning, May decided to confront Clara. You've been acting strange. What aren't you telling me? She demanded over breakfast, the smell of burnt toast filling the kitchen. Clara hesitated, glancing toward Lila's closed bedroom door. It's nothing. Just work stress. May didn't believe her, but before she could push further, the doorbell rang. When Clara opened it, there stood a stranger, a tall man in his late 40s with kind eyes and a suitcase in hand. Clara, May, Lila, he asked softly, looking at each of them in turn as Lila stepped into the hallway. I'm your uncle, your father's brother. The air seemed to freeze. They had never known their father had a brother. The man, who introduced himself as Henry, explained that he had been searching for them for years. Your father, he began, then stopped, his gaze dropping to the worn floorboards. There are things you don't know. Things he wanted to tell you himself, but never got the chance. May crossed her arms. Why now? Why after all this time? Henry's expression carried a weight of regret. Because someone else is trying to tell you in the wrong way. Those letters you've been receiving, they're from someone who wants to hurt you. The sisters exchanged looks, realizing for the first time that each of them had been keeping pieces of the same puzzle. Clara showed her letter, Lila handed over the photograph, and May admitted she'd found a note slipped into her art studio warning her to look under the floorboards. Henry's voice dropped. That's exactly why I came. Your father didn't leave because he wanted to. He was protecting you. What unfolded over the next days was a story they could hardly believe. Years ago, their father had been involved in exposing corruption tied to a powerful family in the city. When threats began reaching his daughters, he disappeared to keep them safe. Henry had helped him vanish, and for years, he had lived under a new identity. But recently, the same people had resurfaced, and now they were after the sisters. The warnings in the letters were both a threat and a twisted form of truth. The past was indeed coming back. May, determined to uncover it all, insisted they search the house for anything hidden. Beneath a loose floorboard in Lila's bedroom, they found a small tin box wrapped in cloth. Inside were old journal pages in their father's handwriting, along with newspaper clippings about missing children, political bribery, and a charity scandal that had once rocked the city. Their father had been a whistleblower, and those he exposed had never forgiven him. The discovery brought fear, but also a strange sense of pride. The man they'd thought had abandoned them had, in reality, sacrificed everything to keep them safe. But the danger was not over. One evening, as Clara locked up the clinic, she noticed a shadow move across the parking lot. The figure didn't approach, but she felt eyes on her the entire walk home. May's art studio was broken into, canvases slashed, paint spilled across the floor. Lila began receiving phone calls where no one spoke, just breathing on the other end. It all built to the night Henry suggested they leave Harbor's Rest for a while. But the sisters refused. "We've run from enough," Clara said firmly. "If Dad taught us anything, it's that you don't back down from the truth." Their courage was tested when an envelope arrived with nothing inside but a burned corner of one of their father's journals. Beneath it, a note. "Next time, it won't be paper that burns." Still, the sisters stayed. Together, they organized a small public gathering at the library where Lila worked, inviting townspeople to hear the real story about their father. They displayed the documents they'd found. Henry spoke about his brother's bravery, and Clara read aloud from the journals. May unveiled a painting she'd been working on in secret, a portrait of their father standing strong against a dark storm, the sea raging behind him, but his eyes unshaken. The event drew more people than they expected, including the town's mayor, reporters, and even members of the very family their father had exposed years ago. Faced with public attention, the threats began to fade, replaced by whispered apologies and avoided gazes. The truth had been set free, and those who had tried to bury it could no longer hide in shadows. The sisters didn't get their father back, but they gained something else, each other, unbreakable now in a way they hadn't been before. Clara learned that protecting someone didn't mean shielding them from pain, but facing it with them. May discovered that art could be more powerful than any weapon. And Lila understood that stories, especially the hardest ones to tell, could save lives. On the first clear night after weeks of rain, the three of them sat together on the porch, Henry beside them. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, reflecting the moonlight like silver fire. "Do you think he knows?" Lila asked quietly. Henry smiled faintly. "If your father were here, he'd say he always knew you'd be brave enough to find the truth." The wind carried the scent of salt and possibility. And though the secrets that had once surrounded them had been heavy, they now felt lighter, not because the past had changed, but because they had faced it together, with kindness, selflessness, and the unshakable power of family. The waves rolled in, steady and sure, as if reminding them that even the roughest tides always return to shore.